Good morning. I'm Diane Macedo. Thanks for streaming with us. The United Nations UN General Assembly is holding a rare emergency session to discuss the Russian invasion of Ukraine. I want to bring in Aaron Katursky, who's in Lviv, Ukraine, for us, as well as Elizabeth Schulze, who's in D.C. The UK Defense Ministry says Ukrainian forces have slowed the progress of Russian forces as they march toward Ukraine. And so, Aaron, I'd like to start with you with the latest on the fighting there before, Elizabeth, we get to what's being discussed at the U.S. General Assembly. So, Aaron, what is the latest?
Well, it was a bit of a quieter day in Kyiv, but we've, in recent hours, been getting some reports of some fairly serious fighting in Kharkiv, which is the second largest city. It's in the eastern part of the country. Pictures, social media images all coming in to show some fairly significant bombardment and a heavy amount of civilian casualties. The Ukrainians at the start of the day said more than 350 civilians had already been killed, including more than a dozen children. That number has almost certainly increased today, and there was some report of heavy fighting too on the outskirts of Kyiv, where Russian forces are still believed to be 15-20 miles away, but coming. Even as the Ukrainians in recent days have slowed the Russian advance, the thinking is the Russians are taking their time to resupply, to reinforce, and perhaps, as President Zelensky has warned here, some critical hours coming.
And Elizabeth, we've been monitoring that UN General Assembly emergency session. We heard from the representative of Ukraine calling on the UN to join, to rally behind Ukraine against Russia and condemn these actions. And now the Russian representative echoing statements that we've heard from Russia leading up to this, accusing the Ukrainian government, or at least in areas of the Donbas region, of genocide and other atrocities, and essentially saying that this action is justified. So what stands out to you so far from what's been said?
Diana, starkly different messages from these two ambassadors to the UN. We first heard from the Ukrainian ambassador essentially making this plea to the international community to understand what the people of Ukraine are going through, calling on the global community to rally its support in condemning Russia for this invasion, saying innocent people are dying, that really this is a complete breach of international norms going back for decades, and making comparisons to World War II, saying that we cannot just stand by and watch as this happened. Then we heard from the ambassador from Russia, who was on a completely separate page, repeating a lot of what we've heard from Russian state media, that this attack was not provoked, that they were defending their own territories and those separatist territories, that they are responding because this is what the Ukrainian people want, which of course is the opposite message that President Zelensky has been making, and really making the point of saying that, you know, the UN is trying to delegitimize this whole kind of effort that Russia is undergoing. Ultimately here, it's very clear that the UN is trying to make a point that the majority of countries are standing by Ukraine, ready to provide additional humanitarian aid, potentially military aid, as they watch this unfold on the ground in Ukraine and also in the neighboring countries with the refugees that are flowing in from Ukraine too.
And Aaron, while this is all happening, Ukrainian delegates are also holding talks with Russian negotiators. So what's the latest on that?
Yeah, these have been going on for several hours now, Diane. It seemed like there was a bit of a pause and maybe another round getting underway. Ukrainian President Zelensky didn't have a lot of hope that these talks would lead to anything, especially with more Russian personnel and artillery pieces coming toward this country. And as Vladimir Putin's talking about putting nuclear assets on tactical alert, doesn't seem like the groundwork for any kind of a ceasefire, but that's what Ukraine has been asking for. And meantime, the Russians want Ukraine to sign a pledge that they'll never join NATO. So we're not sure how far apart the two sides are, or whether anything can be worked out, or whether this is just an effort to simply buy time for Russian resupply. A couple of things have been happening here, though. In Kyiv, the curfew, the nightly curfew, is going to start a little bit earlier. They want people indoors. And the citizen soldiers have continued to mobilize here. They've been stitching together camouflage netting. They've been filling empty beer bottles for Molotov cocktails, conducting neighborhood watch after it gets dark. There's a good deal of fear about Russian saboteurs coming into different parts of the country, and they want to know who's where, any suspicious characters in their own neighborhoods. So ordinary citizens have been taking up this fight, even as many more citizens try to get out. We spent more time today at Lviv Central Railway Station and already, what, 500,000 people from Ukraine have moved to an international border, and there are hundreds of thousands of more on the move trying to flee the fighting.
All right, Aaron Katursky in Lviv, Elizabeth Shelsey-Forrest in D.C., thank you both. And so far, Ukraine has been able to slow Russia's advance toward Kyiv, but we've also seen those satellite images of a massive Russian military convoy heading toward the capital. ABC News contributor and former commander of U.S. forces in Korea, retired General Robert Abrams, joins us now with more on the military developments here. And, General, what is the biggest concern as Russia tries to surround the capital city?
Well, Diane, good morning. I think the biggest concern for the Ukrainians is if Russia is able to, as one of their previous correspondents mentioned, to resupply, gather up their forces, recompose themselves, and then conduct a deliberate operation to encircle and then to penetrate into the capital city. That would be my biggest concern. So I think where the Ukrainian defense forces and the local citizens are being so successful is conducting limited attacks against these convoys when they're most vulnerable, which will completely disrupt the Russian momentum and their ability to synchronize their attack.
Now, France says that Russian President Vladimir Putin told French President Emmanuel Macron that he'll stop strikes against civilian targets, which is interesting given he denied targeting civilian targets before that. So what do you make of this conversation?
As always, we should judge Vladimir Putin by his actions and not his words. His word means nothing. And we knew that long before this latest war in Ukraine. But just look no further than the last 2 weeks where he promised there would be no invasion of Ukraine. And here we are on day 5 of what is a war. This is not a special operation. This is a war against the Ukrainian people.
Now, so far, it appears that this invasion has not gone as Putin planned. So who holds the leverage in negotiations right now?
Well, I think Ukraine has always held the advantage in these negotiations, and they are negotiating from a position of strength. As many people have reported, and I believe it also. I think the Russians underestimated Ukrainian military and the Ukrainian populace resolve and their resilience. And so they're very much at a disadvantage. They are taking losses all over their country. I saw a report today it's almost close to 5,000 dead Russian soldiers, countless destroyed equipment. So I think very clearly that Ukraine has the high ground and in these negotiations. I might also add that Ukraine has the advantage of the entire international community, with the exception of just a couple. But almost the entire international community is speaking with one voice for Russia to stop their offensive operations, stop the war. So that's why I think Ukraine has got the high hand.
But they still do have to face up against that Russian military, which is making its way toward the capital right now. Now, Russia does continue to shell other targets throughout the country, and the Russian Defense Ministry says they've nearly completed the blockade of Mariupol. So do those hold a long-term strategic value, or is this a distraction tactic to try to spread Ukraine's forces to different parts of the country?
No, Mariupol is strategically significant because if you had a map posted right now, you could see that the disputed areas from 2014, Luhansk and Donetsk, and Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula that Russian annexed, that was all Ukrainian territory. And what we're seeing is Russia's military attempting to occupy all of that ground between Crimea and Donetsk so that they've got a land bridge connecting the two. And Mariupol is the centerpiece of that land bridge. So this does have strategic significance, because if they are able to reach a ceasefire, Diane, now it'll be a negotiation as to how far back do the Russian forces need to withdraw. And this will be a point of contention. Russia is not going to want to give up land that they have seized and have occupied. So it has significant strategic impact in my view.
All right, General Robert Abrams, great to have your analysis. Thank you.
Thanks, Diane.
And the UN Refugee Agency says more than 500,000 people have fled Ukraine since the invasion started. Our Phil Lipoff is just across the border in Poland with the latest on that. Hi, Phil.
Diane, these are the steps of Lublin City Hall just off the square here. What you're seeing behind me, mostly women and children, mostly refugees who've come across the border over the last couple of days. They were standing on the steps of Lublin City Hall, singing their national anthem, most of them crying. They were holding their children. We came here. We saw a man who was talking to them. He is the mayor of this city, the mayor of Lublin. He came out. He had a Ukrainian pin on that so many people are wearing in this area, so support for Ukraine. He spoke to them, and we interviewed him afterwards. What he said was, "We're here for you. This is your home. Consider this your home for however long you need to be here." And then we went and we talked to some of the women. We spoke to one specific woman who had 2 young children with her. She could not stop crying. She was so emotional, so upset. She said 3 days ago, her husband said, "Get into the car, go to Poland and be safe. I'm going to stay here and fight." And I asked her, "What do your kids know?" Kids are very little, under the age of 7, both of them. And I said, "What do your kids know about this?" I was thinking that they were too young to know. She said, no, they know what's going on. They keep asking me, "Where's Dad? When is Dad coming home? Why is he fighting with a machine gun?" These are questions young kids are asking their mothers. Their mothers are here on the steps of Lublin City Hall just to tell the world. And I asked, "What do you want the world to know?" And a 17-year-old girl who's studying cosmetology here in Lublin, her parents are in Ukraine. They stayed there. Her father fighting too. And she said, "I want the world to know this war needs to stop." They said the Ukrainian soldiers are strong, but they can't hold off forever. Please come and help. That's what they're saying on the steps of Lublin City Hall. The mayor says you can stay here as long as you need to. And judging by what's happening in their country, they're going to need to stay here for quite some time. Diane?
All right, Phil Lipoff in Lublin, Poland. Thanks, Phil. And ABC News Live continues with coverage of the Ukraine-Russia crisis in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. The U.S. and Western allies are stepping up pressure on Russia and Vladimir Putin with more economic sanctions. The Treasury Department today announced new measures targeting Russia's central bank and investment funds. Let's bring in Max Seddon, Moscow bureau chief for the Financial Times, for more on that. Max, thanks for being here. You know, out of all of the economic sanctions from the U.S. and the West in general, which measure do you think is having the biggest impact right now?
Well, it's absolutely the sanctions against the Russian central bank, because for years, ever since the annexation of Crimea in 2014 and the first sanctions, Russia started working on what was called a Fortress Russia strategy, where they pursued this really conservative macroeconomic policy, and they built up these enormous reserves, which were something like $640 billion in foreign currency and gold. And what these sanctions do is they stop against the central bank. They stop the central bank from selling dollars or euros or pounds to buy rubles to strengthen the exchange rate. So it absolutely obliterated the ruble today. It was already at record lows. It fell by more than 30% at one point. And those long lines you just saw at banks, those are people who are standing in lines trying to get what dollars they can still afford as they see all their savings wiped out. And it's particularly devastating for poor people in Russia, because most Russians live paycheck to paycheck, and they don't have savings in foreign currency. So it's absolutely devastating. There's not really that much that Russia can do about it yet.
Well, I guess you're saying not much. I mean, what can these everyday people, poor Russian people who bank on those savings literally week to week, what recourse do they have right now?
Not very much. There's not really a lot that you can do, and that is something that we're already seeing in the messaging from the Russian government, the way that they're trying to sell these sanctions to their people. The idea in the West is that Russian people will be angry that these sanctions have imposed, and they will be mad at Putin and tell him to stop. And that's not how it works, because it's not Putin who imposed the sanctions. It's the U.S. and the European Union and the UK. And so what happens quite a lot of the time is people are angry at the West. You get this rally around the flag effect. And one of the most watched state TV propaganda hosts last night, he said something to the effect of, this isn't just sanctions against the state. It's not sanctions against officials. It's not sanctions against oligarchs. It's sanctions against you. They don't like you because you're Russian. And it absolutely fits completely, perfectly into Putin's narrative that sanctions have nothing to do with Russia's actions. They're just a measure of containment by the U.S. because they don't want Russia to be a great nation. And a lot of ordinary Russians are sympathetic to that argument.
Now, propaganda and media censorship has been a huge issue in Russia. How has that increased or changed during this conflict?
Well, you're not allowed to call it a war. You're not allowed to call it an invasion. Just a friend of mine who's a Russian journalist, he announced today that he was quitting his TV channel because the channel doesn't want to risk being shut down, and it's removing all the stories where it said that the war was a war. And he said that my conscience doesn't allow me to do that, but I can't let my I don't want to let down my friends by saying things on air that would get them shut down. The issue I think in Russia is that this level of censorship, where they're pretending to their population that the vast majority of what's happening in this war, things like the horrific cluster munitions attack on Kharkiv this morning or the siege of Kiev, that they're not happening. They say that it's just a special operation in the Donbass, in one area of Ukraine, to liberate the Russian speakers. And on state TV, they even show this footage of downtown Kiev, which looks completely peaceful, whereas in reality, everyone I know there has been spending their nights in basements, bomb shelters, and the metro to hide from the assaults. And the issue is that in the age of the internet and 4G, 5G, social media, no one has ever tried to hide a conflict to that extent. At that scale. And for Russian people, this isn't Syria, which is somewhere far off and distant to them. This is Ukraine, where millions of Russian people, they have relatives, they have friends, and it would require really an enormous effort that I think would be unprecedented anywhere outside of China to censor the internet to the point where at least some information wouldn't get through. And the Russian government has started to realize that, but whether they're going to be able to stop that information from reaching ordinary Russian people, I think they could at least make a good shot of it, because 80% of Russian people, their primary source of the news is TV, and TV, there is no war. There's only the special operation in the Donbass.
All right, Moscow Bureau Chief for the Financial Times, Max Seddon. We appreciate it, Max. Thank you.
Thank you.
And ABC News Live's continuing coverage of the Ukraine-Russia crisis will return in just a moment. Stay with us. Welcome back. Facebook's parent company Meta says they have identified and disabled 2 misinformation campaigns exploiting tensions in Russia and Ukraine. One operation included fake websites claiming to be news outlets based in Kyiv. The other targeted accounts of members of the Ukrainian military with videos portraying Ukrainians surrendering to Russia. Earlier, I spoke with Meta's head of security policy, Nathaniel Gleischer, about how his company is dealing with misinformation and disinformation. What more can you tell us about these campaigns and what went into the decision to remove them?
So we see these types of threats around the world, and we've moved very quickly to take action on both of these campaigns because of the invasion in Ukraine. The good news is, although we're seeing these threat actors both target to manipulate public debate and to hack into people's accounts, they haven't appeared to have that much success so far. So, for example, that influence operation that you mentioned that was trying to manipulate the discussion, they only had under 5,000 followers on Facebook and Instagram. And although they also have presences on a number of other social media sites, Twitter, YouTube, and OK and VK, which are Russian social media platforms, they had fairly small followings there as well.
Now, how crucial do you think quick action was in keeping those followings small? What was the potential here for how many people they could have influenced?
I think it's really important to move quickly on taking down these operations and making sure that they don't reach large numbers of people. That's something that my team and our partners across industry have been really focused on over the last few years as we've built up expertise to tackle these threats. That's what we did here, and that's what our goal is to do around the world.
Now, Facebook has been criticized in the past for being slow to act in certain instances. A 2021 study found that at least until June of 2021, that Facebook had significant gaps in its efforts to tackle misinformation about COVID-19. The company also didn't remove accounts that spread misinformation about the 2020 election until after the January 6th assault on the Capitol. So has the company made changes since then on how to handle misinformation and disinformation?
So for the situation in Ukraine, my focus is, I'm our security guy. My focus is on finding and tackling sophisticated threat actors that are trying to manipulate public debate. We've stood up a special operations center, which has let us move very quickly in finding and responding to threats like this. So for example, one of the operations we announced today, we first identified around 48 hours ago and had taken action on it within about a day. So moving very quickly like that is part of how we keep these operations small and catch them before they can reach large audiences.
Do you think Facebook could have done more to stop the spread of misinformation before the war broke out in Ukraine?
We've been working on defending public debate in the country and also, to be clear, helping keep people safe for weeks now. I wouldn't want people to think that this is something that's just started. Part of why we're able to find and catch these operations so quickly is that we have been in country and we have been working with partners in country and around the world to do this for weeks now.
Does that complicate things when you have people in the country? Are you worried about that at all, particularly now that Russia's also partially restricting Facebook access after the platform refused to stop fact-checking some Russian media ads that were going around on Facebook? So does that complicate things? Do you worry at all about your own people?
So we have to be very careful to protect not just our employees, but everyone using public debate, using public social media, or people who could be targeted on the ground. To be clear, I'm not necessarily saying we have employees in country, but what we are doing is working closely with civil society groups that are on the ground, and we have experts in the region who are in close contact to make sure we understand what's happening and make sure that we can protect people as quickly as possible.
So can you walk us through this back and forth with Russia right now? Because they're saying Facebook is censoring them. We know Facebook has said that they're not going to stop fact-checking and that that's what this is about. So where does that stand right now? Because we know Russia has also kind of partially restricted Facebook access to the Russian people.
So Russia has demanded, one of the things that we do is we work with third-party fact checkers around the world. And when these fact checkers identify that a claim is false or misleading, we put a label on that, and then we reduce access to the content. So it doesn't get as much promotion and not as many people see it. And if they do see it, they see a very clear notice that the claim is false or misleading. Russia has demanded that we remove fact checks like this from a number of pieces of content on Russian state media. We have refused to do that. We are going to continue to label. We're going to continue to work with third-party fact checkers to make sure that the public understands what content they're seeing, whether it's accurate, and if anything is false or misleading. As of this morning, we're not seeing a complete block on our services in Russia, but we are seeing the Russian government work to throttle access to Facebook and Instagram in response to these steps and in an effort to prevent people from being able to get accurate information about the conflict or to be able to organize to protest the invasion of Ukraine. This is deeply concerning because using social media platforms is one of the most important ways for people to organize, to express their concerns, and to get accurate information about what's happening in critical moments like this.
So what are the next steps for Facebook as they relate to this conflict? And how do you respond to accusations from the prime ministers of Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, and Poland, who just signed this letter saying that steps taken so far, not only by Facebook, but other social media platforms, they say they're not enough?
So we've already taken a number of the steps outlined in the letter you're referring to and some of the others, and we're continuing to review requests for us to take additional steps. So as one simple example, we've already begun blocking access for certain Russian state media entities to message into Ukraine at all at the request of the Ukrainian government. The challenges here are bigger than any one company. It's important if we think about the threats we've identified today, both of them are targeting across social media and across the internet. As I mentioned, the influence operation was operational on Instagram and Facebook, but was also on Twitter, also on YouTube, also on OK and VK. And they also ran a number of public websites that were the core of their operation. To tackle these threats, you have to have a whole of society response. which is why we work very closely with our partners in industry, in civil society, and in government around the world to share information and counter these threat actors.
All right, Nathaniel Gleicher, we appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me on.
And thank you for joining us. I'm Diane Macedo. Stay with us as ABC News Live continues with news, context, and analysis.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.